Hello, and welcome to part one of this series of mini lectures on IRB basics. In this first lecture, we'll address question number one. What is an IRB? So, what do you think of when you hear human subjects research? This phrase might call up many different images for different people. Maybe you think about the development of life-saving medical treatments. Maybe you think about researchers studying the human condition, trying to understand how people think and why. Maybe the phrase calls up darker images like the Tuskegee syphilis studies, Henrietta Lacks, or even the Nazi experimentation exposed during World War II. Or maybe you've never given it much thought at all, and this is a whole new world for you. In this series of lectures, you'll be introduced to the concept of human subjects research, learn how human subjects are protected, and delve into the basic ethical and regulatory frameworks for conducting human subjects research. There are 3 lectures in this series, and in this first one, we're going to introduce the concept of IRBs, as well as introduce general requirements and tips you should know right off the bat. Let's dive right in. Human subjects research, or HSR, is essentially any research that involves people or people's private information. Whether it's developing new medical advancements like COVID-19 vaccines, understanding the mechanisms and impact of addiction, or understanding how public policies can impact things like health and wellness for different populations, involving people or people's private information is necessary to understand and address the pressing problems of our time. However, inherent in conducting research with humans are risks to those who participate. Some risks are obvious, like the risks of physical side effects from a new drug, but some risks are less obvious, though no less serious. Research can also carry other types of risks, like the risk of a negative emotional or psychological experience, or economic risks, like the potential to lose one's employment. All HSR carries some level of risk, and because of that, those who volunteer for research deserve and need to be protected as much as possible. It is from this need that the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, is born. There are federal, state, and even sometimes local regulations that govern the conduct of HSR, and these regulations were developed with the basic ethical principles in mind. We'll get more into those ethical principles and the regulations in Lecture 3, but in short, the regulations require each institution that engages in HSR to establish an IRB. In addition, the regulations require institutions to develop policies and procedures for establishing an IRB, as well as policies and procedures for how the IRB will function and how it will fulfill its purpose. These policies and procedures demonstrate how an institution complies with the regulations. So what is an IRB? As I mentioned, the regulations require IRBs, but what exactly do they do? Well, IRBs are established to accomplish 2 main tasks: to conduct an ethical review of proposed research projects and to ensure that the research is conducted in compliance with applicable regulations. IRBs consist of at least 5 people, and membership is required by the regulations to be diverse, not just in the sense of diversity of personal background or experience, but also in the sense of diversity of professional expertise and experience. So people who serve on the VCU IRB come from various backgrounds, including faculty, staff, and students from all kinds of departments and areas of the university. The VCU IRB also has several community members serving on the board. These are individuals from the community who are not otherwise affiliated with VCU. And also, for certain types of research, there are special membership requirements. Notably, for research involving prisoners, there must be at least one member serving on the IRB who can represent and advocate for prisoners. And for all research, the composition of the IRB should be such that they have adequate expertise to fully assess the risk-benefit ratio of the research and to tackle ethical questions. Here at VCU, we have one IRB, and its scope is human subjects research. And we'll talk about exactly what counts as HSR in the next lecture. Here is some very basic information about IRB review. These are things that you should definitely know before embarking on a research project that will involve human subjects. First, it is important to understand that you cannot begin your research until you have IRB approval. This includes engaging in recruitment activities. Every part of a human research project, from recruitment through data collection, all the way to data analysis, must be reviewed by and have the oversight of an IRB. The next common misconception is the idea of retrospective approval. There is no such thing as retrospective IRB approval, which is to say you cannot seek IRB approval for a project you have already completed. In the IRB world, it is never a good idea to forego asking for permission now and instead asking for forgiveness later. Where this misconception arises is that it is possible to ask the IRB for permission to use retrospective data, meaning data that has already been collected for some other project. But that kind of research still needs prospective approval, meaning you must seek IRB approval before beginning the project that uses the retrospective data. Next, the IRB process is going to require you to provide not only a description of your project and its procedures, but it will also require you to provide several supplemental items in your IRB application. Basically, if your participants are going to see it or interact with it, the IRB is going to need to review it. So start thinking now about supplemental documents you may need to include in your IRB submission. And finally, an important thing for you to know is that, with a few exceptions, any changes you plan to make to a research project after you secure initial IRB approval will need to be provided to the IRB for review before you can implement those changes. This is typically called an amendment process. This is a mechanism the IRB uses to ensure continued oversight over a project as the project grows and changes over time. Now that you understand where IRBs come from and what their function is, the next step is to understand that not all research requires IRB review. Only human subjects research requires IRB review. So in the next lecture, we will define HSR as a subset of research.